All right, without further ado, it's your turn now, Miriam.
Well, thank you. It's an honor to be a part of Ananda, Texas this morning. I grew up in Texas, so I am a native Texan. So anyway, thank you for having me. It's a joy to be here. Always love to talk about Swamiji. And I hope that you've come with questions because it helps a lot. I remember Swamiji saying that it was always difficult in satsangs when people would say, Swami, tell us a story about Master. And he'd just go, well, it was kind of hard to be just, he said actually his mind would go blank, he couldn't think of anything. But if someone asked a question, like a spiritual question or just something that would trigger those memories, there you go. So I hope you guys have some good questions. I thought this morning that I would start with the topic, the affirmation we have today on kindness. What better place to start with Swamiji than to talk about kindness? When I was interviewed by last September by Narayan from Crystal Clarity, he said he was talking about the essential qualities that we've all seen in Swamiji, and like sweetness and kindness. And he asked me just to share, like, what did I see in terms of some of those qualities? So that really got me to thinking about the concept of kindness in relationship to being nice. And I think all of us here today are nice people and we treat people very nicely. But what's the difference in being nice and being kind? And in witnessing what I saw with Swamiji, and he writes this in that affirmation, but it really triggered me to be thinking about it more deeply, was that literally everyone he met was his friend. He just didn't meet strangers, and it didn't matter where he was when he met them, in grocery stores and on the train and the plane, whatever. He really saw everybody as his friend. And even in the last moments of his life, Swamiji checked his emails. That was the last thing he did, just in case somebody there needed him. And he was willing to give that one more time. So there's also another question that I do get asked a lot about Swamiji, and that is, what was it like to be in his presence all the time? And I was, in the last 8 years of his life, I was with him for 14, but in the last 8, I lived with him normally, and certainly traveled with him and often lived in the same house, except, well, sometimes at the village, I had a room there too. So I got to see him on a daily basis, what was that like? And there's definitely many, many sides to that. Swamiji was a constant fount of creativity and energy. I mean, in a sense, he was the yogi for Dwapara Yuga, because he had so much energy coming through him all the time. And it didn't really matter how sick he was or what was going on with the body, that energy was still there, that creativity was still there. When I was writing the book, I had not journaled in those years with Swamiji. What I had done was write lots of emails. And so I had, because we were always planning the next trip, whatever was coming up with Swamiji. And so in going through those emails, one of the things that struck me was how enormously busy we were all the time. There just wasn't a moment. Well, there were moments you could feel of downtime, but there weren't days off, anything like that. But there was just like always in movement. Swamiji was always this flow of movement. And that was an amazing thing to live in. I often read books about the Christian mystics, early Christian mystics. Saint Teresa of Avila, if you just read her life, how enormously busy these people were and how much they were able to accomplish in sometimes very short lifetimes. And that's what I saw in Swamiji, is like when you are, I guess you could say, in that super conscious state and really in attunement with, in Swamiji's case, with the guru, you do have so much energy to make things happen, to move energy, to like in Saint Teresa's situation, to establish like 17 convents all over Spain, and that was an enormous amount of difficult travel, but the energy was always there no matter how bad the body's failing. So being with Swamiji was always like being in this vortex of energy, this vortex of moving energy. And the other side to that is, I think quite often we want to put, or we do put these great souls kind of like, I don't know, up on pedestals or whatever, and we idealize their lives, and we think, well, I could never be that because I'm too human. But in being with Swamiji all the time, I got to witness his humanity in the midst of his divinity. And it wasn't like Swamiji, like every day was a good day. Definitely was not that. He didn't wake up every morning even-minded and cheerful. He didn't jump out of bed like, woohoo, let's go. The body gave him so much trouble, and the body hurt a lot. There was lots, pain and just the fatigue. Sometimes he would say, I'm just so tired of being tired. So, mornings could be challenging, just like for us. They're being able to find a reason to get out of bed. We watch Swamiji go through those same struggles, and the same struggles of having visions for the work and moving the work, forward as much as he could energetically do it, but then also having to deal with, us, the rest of us, maybe not being able to move at that lightning speed. And so certainly, disappointments, things like that, I suppose, entered in to Swami's psyche, but they were more like disappointments that he just wanted the work to move faster, not disappointments in us. He just simply accepted that's where we were. And also getting back to the topic of kindness, I was thinking about how to even talk about, there is the aspect of kindness, which Swamiji very much was very kind, but there was also a very strong element in being with him in a day-to-day basis. And also, I think, for the spiritual directors and other people that he was working with in their evolution, there was discipline. Swami was a very strong, I guess you could say, disciplinarian. That's kind of a hard word, but he would give course corrections. And okay, they weren't always nice. They were kind, but we had I'm going to really step out here now and talk about this a little bit. We had a thing we would say when we lived with Swamiji in Gurgaon, India. We lived with him, 7 of us were in the house with him in his home there in Gurgaon called Guru Kripa. And so many things happened in that house. A lot of master's work in India started there. The Bhagavad Gita was written there. A lot of energy was flowing in that house all the time. And when Swami, it's like when his feet hit the ground in India, he was running at top speed. And it was pretty hard for everybody to keep up with that. And so there would be times in the house where I think what was happening for him is he just wanted it to be, more and better, and faster. And, and he would, what's the word? I wonder what he's aggravated, but you could just tell there was just like a slight irritation. And so we had a joke in the house that today heads are rolling, meaning, heads rolling. But you never took it personally. It was impossible for me, and I think impossible for most others who were close to Swami, to take his course correction, his discipline personally, because he was completely impersonal. I guess you could describe it as a detached involvement. He was very involved in everything that was happening, but there was a detachment, and meaning more like non-attachment. So he didn't necessarily have expectations for us. He had expectations for the work. But it was actually, in some ways, those days when heads were rolling were fun. That sounds kind of silly, but it was because you felt the energy behind it, and that was upward moving, and it was upward moving in your spine as well, and that's where joy lives. So yeah, that was enlightening, to say the least. I talk pretty fast. I've been talking for 20 minutes, not quite 20 minutes, 15 minutes. It would be very helpful if people have questions. So I don't know how Supriya?
Yeah.
Hi.
Hi, Miriam. So ever since I started your book and now have finished your book,
Okay.
I wanted to ask you the question. So here it is, and everybody can hear. And so I thought, of course, we all, I believe, would think, wow, number one, you have a responsibility as a nurse to minister to Swamiji. Yes, we know Divine Mother Master is in charge and Dr. Peter's there behind the scenes, all the things you read about in the book, which are great. And my thought was, but how did you feel, perhaps like you knew you were about to enter the room, whether it was to check on Swami in the morning, whether it was for a procedure? How did you feel? I'll just leave it at that. Before you were about to let your nursing skills and divine guidance take over, how were you doing, feeling?
Oh, that's a beautiful question. Thank you, Supriya. It's good to see you again. It's been a long time. Well, a number of ways to answer that. I had a very different relationship with Swami than anybody. And I didn't quite understand the complete nature of that relationship until literally the moment he left the body the first time in the dining room. Because it was always, it was a very detached relationship. It had to be, because I needed to make objective decisions. And at the same time, they weren't objective necessarily based on my nurse's training. They were based on what I felt like Master was telling me to do. And it did seem like most of the time, if not all of the time, I was able to hear what Master wanted next because I had been trained, because I knew what I was looking at. I had Dr. Peter also, offering his diagnosis by phone, and it was just easy for Master in a way. But to answer your question about what it was like right before you go into the room with Swamiji, I didn't have the feelings about Swamiji that I think almost 100% people have, and that is that he was kind of awe-inspiring for a lot of people. A lot of people get very nervous around him. Would want to be in his presence, but afraid of it at the same time, and things like that. I have to say that those entire 14 years, right up until he passed, I saw what a great being he was, but I didn't see it completely. Not, I still don't, but I guess I was not awe-inspired by him. I was able to see perhaps those human frailties, but also it was just that I had a job to do, even though that never felt like a job. I had a great service to do. I had to go in there and be no handshaking because I'm accessing, a porta-calf, which was a very painful procedure. I couldn't go in there waffling on what I thought needed to happen. And I needed to be able to say to Swami, this is what we have to do now. And sometimes those pieces of news were not pleasant for him. He and I did have an agreement at the end of his life, probably those last 4 years or so, that I would keep him out of the hospital. That would not be our first resort, because I could take care of him at home. There was almost nothing I couldn't do at home, because I had done so many things at home. I'd given chemotherapy at home. I'd taken care of all kinds of people. I was an IV nurse for people at home. So I could do most everything at home. And he so hated the hospital. Doctors and nurses and everybody bustling about. And so we had this understanding. And if you've gotten to the story about being in Lugano with Swamiji, and he was very sick. We had flown him from India. And I think he was having strokes when we left India. And when we got into Lugano, he basically ended up having 3 conditions in his body that all would have probably warranted him being in an intensive care unit in a hospital. And because we had the agreement, I wouldn't put him in the hospital, but also because we were in Italy. And I'm sorry for my Italian friends, but I couldn't put Swami in an Italian hospital. I just couldn't. And if you've read the story, and it's a really good story, the person who really helped me with that care was a veterinarian. And he managed to get me the blood tubes I needed, the lab tubes, and get me results and take care of that end of it. And even draw Swami's blood, because that was a moment of incredible stress for me. And because I was also operating against the wishes of a lot of people around me, I just knew I couldn't access his vein that day. I'd done it many, many times. He got really mad at me if I wouldn't try, but I knew that this veterinarian could. He was used to the little tiny veins in animals, and he did it. It was great. It's a good story. You must read it. It ends really well. But I had to stay very detached from Swamiji in order to make these kinds of decisions, because I was going against all the spiritual directors who were with us on that trip, a lot of very powerful people, and even going against, in a sense, my own training a lot of times. But just knowing that this was the right thing to do. It was, Swamiji helped with some of these decisions, because a lot of times he would get really, really sick right before it was time for us to travel to go on to the next event. Because, for him, it was just this long flow of writing a book, publishing a book, launching a book. And all that meant traveling from one continent to another continent. And every time it was time to go to that next project, he'd get really sick. And he said to me more than once, he would say, "This is just Satan trying to keep me from doing what I have come to do." And in him saying that, then it was a little easier for me to go, well, we're getting on the plane. Because there were times too when he would say that. And on the other hand, he would like an excuse not to go, because he would be feeling so bad. Can't I just stay home? Oh, no, we're going. You have to go. I don't know if it gives away the end of the book, but a couple of weeks before Swamiji passed, I'd even said to a very good friend, I was worried because I didn't feel about Swamiji like everybody else did. I didn't have that sweet affection for him. And, I just see people, Swamiji, Swamiji, and I just didn't feel that. And I said to this friend, I'm not sure I can even be a part of Ananda after Swami passes because, I don't feel this for the founder of Ananda. And then on the morning of his passing, he left the body twice that morning. And the first time he left, he was sitting at his dining room table about to have breakfast and started this, small seizing up. And I put my arms around him to hold him in the chair and also to be able to feel for the heartbeat and everything. And I felt him slip out, and he had the color that you see when people leave, the heart had stopped. And it was in that moment that actually this, in a sense, what I came to realize that Master had put a veil between me and Swamiji so that I didn't feel that sweet affection for him, so I could do what I needed to do. And in that moment, that veil was totally pierced, and my heart just, exploded in so much love for him, And I started crying, and which I had never cried any of my moments with Swamiji. And yes, well, definitely because he was passing, I suppose, but I think it was more just because the love was so intense in that moment. And then I realized, okay, Master put that veil there, and now it's not there anymore. So that's a good question, Supriya. I hope I answered it all the way around the world.
Thank you, Miriam. That was beautiful. And I think that there's many people that can appreciate just the difference that you bring into the different type of discipleship and relationship, I should say, with Swami, not only professionally, but just that there's all these people that are around and have this really deep, inspiring connection, but there's also some that have different karmas with him. And I know even for myself, because I had the opportunity to work with him for a few years in the Hermitage, I didn't fully understand that relationship or appreciate it until he passed as well, and I had this experience that just of like similar in the sense of great love, and it was like I felt like he'd taken some of that karma with him that was keeping me from feeling that same kind of understanding of his relationship to me and to my discipleship to Yogananda. So I think it's a wonderful example for people that everybody's relationship is going to be a little different. It doesn't have to look like everyone else's or anybody else's. And it's such a sweet story. I was wondering too if you would tell us how you came to become his nurse. And you said you had lived in Texas. How did you get to California? Just sort of a little bit of the background.
Okay. It's a long story, and I'm not going to tell the whole story, but I'll tell you enough. I did leave Texas with a husband and went out to Berkeley to go to school and all that. And I had trained in cardiac nursing in Texas, and then I did intensive care nursing and then home infusion in California. And also in my book, I do talk about the story of how I came to him and how I came to the path. Through the AY, of course, through Master. And it happened very quickly. Once I actually started meditating even briefly, and took discipleship because I wanted Kriya. After reading the AY, I wanted Kriya. And you have to, be a disciple. So I took discipleship thinking, oh, well, what does it matter? I want Kriya. Not realizing the power of that vow, power of discipleship to master, to a great avatar. And Master took charge of my life instantly and sent me to Italy. I felt called to go there first as mostly just a tourist pilgrim kind of thing. I didn't even know there was an Ananda there. And the people in California told me it was there. So, well, I'll go out and just check it out. I was only going to be there a couple of days across an Easter weekend, and I ended up staying 2 months. And I met Swamiji during that time. I met him. I saw him for the first time on Palm Sunday. And that story's in the book too. It's a cute story. My first impressions of Swami. And then because I stayed for 2 months and I got to know more of Ananda, and I was feeling pretty strongly that I wanted to be a part of Ananda. But I had also had a lot of SRF friends, and I had heard things about Swami Kriyananda, about the court case. I needed clarification. And it was an interesting process of learning about the court case and the truth of it. And that was actually what helped me make my decision to stay in Ananda and to follow Swamiji. And it was also, there was somebody said to me during that period of time, wouldn't it be great if you could come and live here and you could be Swami Kriyananda's nurse? And when that person said that, I was like, no way, I don't want that job. No. Because I felt like if I ever did anything wrong, I'd be really held accountable for that. And yet at the same time, in the back of my mind, there was this voice going, yeah, you're going to have to do that. That's what's trying to happen here. So I went home, back to California, stopped my whole life. In 2 months, packed up everything, and I moved to Ananda CC. I'd gone out in March for the visit, came home in May, and moved back into July to Assisi and lived in a tent there. And I heard sort of through the grapevine that Swamiji was having heart palpitations and stuff. And I wrote him a note, and I just told him that I was a cardiac nurse and that I knew that caffeine could make your heart beat and give you palpitations. And I knew he liked cappuccinos, and I said that to him. And I was like, just stop bringing my cappuccinos, right? But that was the door. That was the door that opened. He immediately asked me, sent a message for me to come see him. I went over to see him, and we started this relationship of me checking on him, maybe once a week or less. And he would call me, I had a phone, I could go to him. And it was simple things, take his blood pressure, talk about how he was doing. And then he did over time start to have problems with the body. And so Kirtani and Shivani, they would call me and I would come over, and I saw a lot of amazing things in those first years in Ananda CC with Swamiji, and they're in the book. So read the book. And I'm happy to tell any of those stories, but I want to make sure we have time for any other questions too.
There's a copy of the book. Yeah. I was going to say, if you had a copy, put it up. But that can be had through Crystal Clarity. So, yeah, wonderful. I'm looking forward to reading it. I'm very excited about it. I got to get a copy. We used to order those when we were in person. We'd always have them in the boutique, and now it's like, now I got to do it myself. So I got to get out there. Well, let's see if there's some other folks that have some questions here. You can either put them in the chat or open up your camera and mic. We would love to get your additional questions. Okay, Joy raised her hand there.
Yeah, Miriam, you talked about course corrections and, all the lessons you've learned in the 14 years you were with him and everything. What stands out, an inspiration that came through Swamiji or something that to this day, it is really, you know, you may not think about it every day, but something that is just very strong within you, you know, one of his lessons that you learned.
That's a very good question, and I have an answer. And it's actually something that I think about a lot. And it was just a moment in time with Swamiji when my head rolled, but it stays with me. And I think about it a lot. There was a situation going on in India at the time between two different people. And I had a tendency to side with one of them and be against the other one, right? And Swamiji would, you know, often ask me, how's it going? You know, how's it going in this particular situation? And he would, in a sense, ask my opinion, I suppose. And one day I went into his bedroom, probably to test blood sugar or something, and he asked me, you know, how's it going? Maybe he asked me a specific question, I don't know. But I kind of immediately blurted out my opinion, which was siding with this other person here. And Swamiji, almost like he turned on me. It was like, turned on me and he said, well, so-and-so, that other person, they have their reality too. And I was like, oh. And boy, and the energy that Swamiji could put that out there with, you know, it just kind of hits your whole body. And you know it's important. You know, okay, this message is important. And so in a way, it has been like a guiding thing for me when, because we always come to these places with people where we might have differing opinions and different perspectives on things. And I can hear Swamiji saying, well, Joy has her reality too, because Swamiji had an amazing ability to see the reality of other people. And that's why I think we all liked being near him. People wanted to be in his presence because he could see everybody, not only their reality, but their highest potential. And he could speak from that or relate to people from that. And you know, he could really see how much, if somebody was coming to him for spiritual counsel, he could see how much they could hear, you know, how much their reality would allow them to hear course correction. And he would tell them, you know, as much as he could about, you know, what that course correction needed to look like. But it had to be within the frame of what they could hear and accept, and then make the interchange. Yeah. Thank you. That's a good question.
Miriam,
Yes.
I
Hi,
read,
Fedor.
hi, I read your book and it's full of information and your experiences and most important, day-to-day life, which I loved.
Mm.
But I imagine that in such a rich years, and you condensed it to the book you wrote, I suppose there are many stories and many other things that didn't get to the book because you couldn't put everything in it. What other either stories or teachings or important things you still carry with you that you say, I wish I had put that in the book for everyone to read?
A sweet question, Fedor. Thank you. Yeah, I too felt like that there were a lot of stories, and what was I going to write about? Which ones were going to make it to the book? And it was an interesting process writing the book because I didn't really write the book. Swamiji did. I was living out near Laurelwood in a farmhouse, so I was close to the Yogananda Gardens, where we had that 7-foot statue of Yogananda up there for a while now. He's in the village. It's really quite beautiful, but he was still there. And so every morning, I would take, it's kind of confusing. We keep changing the host. The keeps wavering here on the screen. Anyway, I would get up and I would hike up to the gardens, to the shrine, and I would sit up there, first with the big statue of Master, but there was so much energy with that thing. It was so big. And it was so powerful. So then I would go to the smaller shrine, which was just the smaller statue of Master, and I would sit there with that. And the view, the vista view out over that was just incredible. Very expansive sky, and hills. And I would just kind of meditate, but mostly just try to open myself up to Swamiji and thinking about the stories or this or that. And then all of a sudden, a thought would come into my head. Like I almost could hear Swamiji say, remember that email, remember that story. And I would jump up and I would run down the hill and get on my computer. And I would feel Swamiji right in there. And we would just write. And then it was done, 2 hours, 3 hours done. And he would move out and I would burst into tears just because I could just feel him so strong. And I feel like in that small book, that Swamiji had me say the things he wanted me to say. Those were the stories that he felt like were important and had lessons in them for everybody, not just for me. And it was interesting because it only took me 4 months. It really only took 3 months to write it. I did just sit with the book for a month, waiting to see, is there anything else, Swamiji? Anything else you want to say? Anything else coming? Nothing. And then send it off to be edited by Anandi Cornell. I have, Fedor, thought about the possibility at some point, not anytime soon, but a couple years, to do a rewrite, to write it, maybe expand on it more. Because I'm sure Swamiji would give me more stories. There were 30,000 emails that I waded through to find those stories. And some of the stories had already been written, because I had written these long emails to friends and people I knew, telling them what was happening and telling them in a pretty intimate way because they were my close friends. And I was, to me, more valuable than a journal because I was trying to convey to them what I was seeing and feeling. And so, but I'm sure there's more stories, Fedor. I keep you posted.
Thanks.
And I think it's great. I just want to say that, you come online with us, you have other satsangs, you're being interviewed by other people, who are doing things. So Swami continues to use you now. The book's out, but you also, like you shared with us, and I think it's important for me and everybody to hear about the humanity of him, just like we heard about Yogananda's humanity, even though he was an avatar. We hear about Swamiji's humanity, even though the great soul that he was. So thank you for continuing to give stuff to us, to give insights. Thank you.
Thank you, Shupriya. I often had the feeling Swamiji was showing me things that I was to talk about and write about later, things that might make others uncomfortable. The people who had been with him, from the beginning, certain ideas that he knew I had a big mouth. And I would, and also I can't not tell the truth either. Yeah, needs to be honest. I try to be refined about it, but big mouth. Are there other questions? Eric?
I have a question. You when you were with Swami, you were also with those that were closest to him, and you could see what they were going through. and the lessons, in a sense, you could sense the lessons they were going through. Did you see like little breakthroughs that people had in his presence through having to deal with those things?
Go ahead and mute.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah.
Maybe one example if you have one.
I have to think about it. There was, yeah, I wasn't present for that one, so I won't talk about it. I just know about it. But I was present when Swamiji wanted to take the work to LA. And so we moved down to LA. Jyotish and Devi moved with us. So Swamiji had his own little apartment in the backyard of Lisa Kaz's house. And the rest of us lived in the main house with Lisa and her children and everybody. And Narayani was there, Lakshman was there. There was a period of time when Leela was there. So we were packed in there, and Jyotish and Devi were there. And this was an enormously challenging time in LA. Oh my gosh, for Swamiji. It was probably next to the court case, one of the most difficult things he did was to try to bring the work, master's work, through him to LA. I mean, master's work's obviously quite there in SRF, but for him to try to bring it as the kind of the outcast brother, that was huge. And also for him, it was coming home, because that's where it started for him. It was in that area, and he never gave up trying to communicate with Dayamata, and then after she passed with Mirnalini, I mean, even I think maybe a week or so before he passed, he was writing an email to Mirnalini, and he did try to communicate with them while we were in LA. Had a meeting with two of the brothers out at Lake Shrine. It was a very painful meeting for him. And throughout this whole thing, there's Jyotish and Devi trying to hold it together, trying to hold Swamiji together, us as a group, a new work. And it wasn't easy. He was writing the book that changed names several times. I think the final one was Yogananda for the World. And that was a difficult book. Difficult because Swamiji was writing some harsh truths in it. And he was also having so many problems with the body at that time. A lot of times he couldn't sit and write at the computer. So he would be dictating, and I remember Devi trying, typing as fast as she could and trying to keep up, or trying to work with him on the editing. And yeah, it was a very difficult time. It was a highly emotional time for some reason for all of us. And for Swamiji, it was a time of, in a sense, high anxiety. So watching Jyotish and Devi, him working with them and heads rolling a lot there, and watching them come out of that, of course, much stronger. You can't not go through something like that with Swami and not come out evolved and changed. And my relationship with them changed a lot too, because they had not traveled with us that much, because a lot of times we were traveling in Italy or we were traveling in India. And so when he would be in America, he'd just be at the village. So they were there. So I wasn't in their presence as much, and they hadn't necessarily watched me work with him that much. So our relationship had to shift and change too. And I think the three of us came into a very nice place of trust, because I was making decisions sometimes that were counter to medical advice, and they had to let me do that. And then I think they really came to trust, and we had a very beautiful relationship after that. But that was not an easy time for them in particular. Thanks, Eric. That was a good question. Thank you. All good questions.
Hello, thanks for joining.
Hi.
Say, I was you basically already almost answered this question, but I'll go ahead and ask it in case there's a little more. I understood you said that the court case might have brought you closer to Swami, or actually really join Ananda, is what I heard. And I was wondering if you could just expand on that, if there's any more. And then also, I was interested in his, as he got older, how he was able to keep up or dwindle his daily sadhana. Three things: yoga, energization, and meditation.
Okay. That's a double-barreled question. That's a good one. I'm not quite sure where to start. I talked about it in the book a lot, about the court case and what was told to me and what I came to with that. And then there's an entire chapter in the book called Truth Can Never Die. Because we were in India at the time when that incident happened. And Swamiji had been invited to be a special guest on a talk show called We the People. And it was supposed to be spiritually focused on spiritual leaders. It was Satya Sai Baba's birthday. And so his devotees were going to be there, and they invited Swami. And I was trying to remember if they must have invited another leader, but I can't remember who that was, because they really came after Satya Sai Baba and then came after Swamiji. And we didn't know what they were going to do, of course, because they painted this beautiful picture, right? So we think it's just an opportunity, kind of in this way, for Swami to get some exposure. We were brand new to India. So we show up. Swami had a very, very bad morning, very rough morning, very sick, sick on the way to the studio. We get there and we're in this huge arena of bleachers inside, and devotees and people are sitting all around. And I think, like Satya Sai Baba's group kind of was over there, and then we were over here, and the talk show host was asking questions, and she started out very nice, very nice. And so the Satya Sai Baba devotees got to talk about the miracles that their guru had done and how much he had changed their lives, and it was very sweet, very loving. And I think she asked Swamiji a pretty good question somewhere in there too. I think she asked Swamiji, what did he think about the miracles? I guess that's what it was. And Swamiji's answer was lovely, and it's in the books, you read it. I'll get it wrong if I try to quote it. And then suddenly there were apparently people in the audience who were going to challenge the the validity of what Sai Baba could do. And this guy stands up and he's like, look, I can manifest jewelry in my hand. It's all a magic show, all a magic show. So they were starting to what's the word, disqualify Sai Baba, whatever, but not make him look very good. And his devotees are, it's his birthday. And I was like, oh my goodness, what's up now? And then she mentioned something about maybe some sexual allegations that had been up against Sai Baba. And I remember thinking, oh dear, where is she going to go with this? And then all of a sudden she turned on Swamiji. She said, so Swami Kriyananda, what about those sexual allegations against you? And Swamiji said, well, I did it. It was a mistake. I did it. I learned my lessons. I moved beyond that. It was amazing. It was like complete truth, complete transparent truth. And that's what had brought me. I mean, my friend way back had told me what the court case was about and what the depositions were about. I'm like, if someone can, slip or fall or whatever, in a sense, the way Swamiji did, and then still come up out of that and become who he was obviously had become. And I wasn't seeing much yet because that was new, but I still saw something I wanted in him, that light, great light. Then I was going to follow that person. And that was, in a sense, my first a show of Swami's humanity. And I was like, yes, if he can do it, maybe I can do it. So that was a very powerful moment, both of those. So read the book. Okay. Your other questions, just what I really like. Swami's sadhana, his ability to keep up with the practices, whether it's meditation, kriya, energization, yoga. I'll start with yoga because obviously in his poor body, yoga wasn't happening. So there was no asanas at all. There were times when there's just no way he could even energize. Whether or not he, laid in the bed and did it mentally, I don't know. And I know he tried, he wanted to, he certainly thought about it. Narayani's presence in his life was such a help because she was like, she was his spiritual, soulmate, sister, whatever you want to call it, daughter, he called her often daughter. But there was such a rapport between them that, she could hold on to him physically while he would do, certain parts of the energization. And then there was another part where he wanted to go through the entire energization exercises with Shurjo at one point and filmed all that because he wanted to make sure we were getting it right. It was so important to him. And then definitely when he did do energization, he did feel better, actually. His body did better. I think for Swamiji, life was a sadhana. Everything he did was his sadhana. And he definitely did sit. I know in Pune, he and Narayani would sit in his meditation room there together, not for long periods of time. But they would sit and meditate together. I saw them more closely than I would in the village or in Assisi, in his house in Assisi. But what I witnessed with him for myself was just, and it's in my book as well, just coming upon Swamiji in the living room. He would have gotten up and gotten to his, nice comfy chair in the living room. And then I would be coming in with, my medicines, pills, whatever, and tidying up the room. Leela would come in, putting breakfast on the table, whatever. And Swamiji would be sitting there in bliss, obvious bliss, eyes closed, upright, arms in his lap, and he would be sitting there meditating. And with the look on his face and the glow and the light around, he was in bliss. It didn't last for hours, not at all, just minutes. Our coming in wouldn't disturb him. He wouldn't react to us coming in. Swamiji did say many times that, his heart was in atrial fibrillation, which means the upper chambers are quivering all the time instead of contracting. So he was in that. And he said that felt like a washing machine in his chest, which made doing Kriya very difficult. So he would lament that he couldn't do Kriya because of his heart. But, I think at some point, you're so one with the guru, but he wanted to do his practices. And Anand Stickney tells the story of coming home pretty late with Swamiji in the car one night from some event or something, and Swamiji saying, I better get in there and do my kriyas before bed so I can keep my hat in the ring, is what he said. And so, effort. Effort was always there, always there. So Maitri, I am seeing that it is 10:30.
Yeah. Well, do you have a hard stop, or are you willing to hang out a little bit longer? We'll see if there's a few more questions, and I want to just say something while people are still maybe figuring that out. I just remember that. I didn't know you when I was at the village. I think you came after I left, and and then, but I would read the emails about everything. And then I remember the first time that I met you in person was up in Laurelwood. And did you go to Laurelwood pretty soon after Swami passed, or I'm thinking that you did? And I just remember you were very introspective initially and quiet. And I thought, boy, what is it that she's going through in assimilating all that time? And I don't know if you want to speak to that a little bit. But then the next year when I came back to Laurelwood, because Mark and I have a very special relationship to Ananda Portland, and welcome Ananda Portland folks. But at any rate, then you were in a different role. You had gone into sort of running the retreat center. And all I can say is that you exuded kindness in every way, and still do. But I mean, we were talking about kindness. That part is part of you. You embody that, and I just remember that, and always have been very grateful for your example in that way. So,
Thank you.
I have a quick question on the subject of kindness versus niceness. You know, how we started out. You know, you would have had a unique relationship with Swami where, you know, there were times where you needed to be the person in charge and say, this is what's going to happen. And I can only imagine that if you were nice in those situations, you might not be able to fulfill that role, but there's certainly a possibility to be kind in that role. I wonder if you could talk about that a little bit.
No, that's really very insightful, Mark. I am a decisive person. I have friends, I don't think they would call me nice or kind, but because I can just, you know, cut to the chase. And but Swamiji and I had this relationship, and also he had a relationship with Master, and he really accepted whatever came to him came from the Guru. And if that was me coming to him and saying, Swamiji, we have to go to the hospital, or Swamiji, I have to do this, you know, painful procedure, you know, there would be sometimes a breath, you know, he'd take a breath and then he would accept, and you could just, so many times you just felt him saying that, you know, thy will be done, whatever needs to happen. There was an incident, when he was very ill in Pune and had to have kidney dialysis. He was very ill, he came very close to dying in that. Because I had told him I would keep him out of the hospital, I tried to, but we couldn't tell what was going on with him from his lab work. Dr. Peter was looking at it, and you know, we didn't have enough data to know what was happening with Swamiji, and he really needed to be in a hospital. And I fought that one pretty good. We went first to the hotel and then went to the hospital the next morning or the afternoon, whatever, but only to the ER, only to get an opinion and then leave. And then came back for more opinions. And in this moment, and it's written extensively in the book, because this was a powerful moment for me anyway, when the doctors were definitely saying, you know, he has to go to ICU, and they were telling me everything that had to be done. And as an ICU nurse, I'm like, yeah, he's got to go to ICU. And but I didn't feel like it was my decision to make at that moment, because Swamiji was still he was conscious. He was pretty ill and was laying flat in a bed. He wasn't talking much, quite inward. But I knelt down next to him so that I could be speaking into his good ear so he could really hear me. And I said, Swamiji, if you feel like this is the end, we'll take you home and we'll keep you comfortable. But if not, we have to go into intensive care unit. And Swami kind of looked up at the ceiling. I saw him take a breath. And then he said, I have an obligation to stay in this body as long as I can to serve Master's work. Now the hospital bed was surrounded by medical students, residents, and they wanted him in ICU. He was an emergency case. And I just looked up from where I was sitting and I shook my head. Yes, they grabbed the bed and they whipped that bed out the door, on the elevator, down the hall, into ICU. And they worked on him continuously for 24 hours. And if they hadn't done that, he would have been gone in 24 hours. But just to answer your question, I get into these big stories, but a lot of times, yes, Mark, I was just decisive, and Swami trusted. And he trusted me, I think, and more so, he trusted the guru. And if Master was saying to him through me, this is what needs to happen. We're going to get on a plane, even though you're in really bad shape, and we're going to go to another country. It was like, okay, thy will be done.
Thank you for that, and thank you so much for the dedication that you approached those years with. I mean, I can't even imagine the challenge that was there.
Very strong soul and a very high soul, I would say.
Oh, I have one other question. Where in Texas are you from?
Beaumont, Port Arthur area.
Oh,
Southeast.
okay.
Southeast.
Yeah,
Long way from Dallas. 2 days
Yeah.
drive from Dallas.
Where it gets really hot.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right.
Right.
We are off of Facebook. There was a question in the chat box. We've been off for quite some time. So feel free to come on if you are wanting to. We have a few more minutes. We can be with Miriam if you have a question, chat box, or just come on live. So
Actually, I just wanted to say I just bought your book and installed it, and I don't say that for any other reason, just say it's pretty easy.
Okay. Yeah, I love ebooks. Yeah.
Yeah.
Some people want hard copies. That's there too.
anybody else? I don't have the grid up. You want to put the grid up because if
All
somebody
right.
raises their hands, we won't see it. But anybody else? Anybody want to open up their cameras at least and wave? There's Chris and
Maybe
Linda.
a few more people there.
Missy, yay, Hugh, Sonia, down in Houston area.
Yeah, great to see all your faces.
Yeah,
Oh, Sonia.
and then wonderful. And David LeBrier is here from Portland. And is Chris, are you from Portland too?
Yeah, I'm actually closer than 100 yards. I can look out my window and see her cottage. So
Okay. And I think Joy is from Portland. And what about Fedor? Are you Portland too? Oh, you're muted. You're muted. Sorry.
He is. He's my neighbor.
Oh, okay.
And her neighbor next door.
Closest.
Wonderful. Well, like I said, we have a special. We love Portland.
We have a soft spot in our hearts for
Yeah.
Portland.
So I'm
Definitely.
glad you guys could
And
join us
Wildwood.
today.
How about David? I don't know David.
David is from Portland too. David LeBrier, the famous photographer. We use photos of his sometimes in our newsletter. Yeah. So anybody else want to ask a question? Say hi.
Hugh's got his hand up.
Okay.
Hugh.
Hi, Miriam.
Hi.
So, thank you for being here. What a blessing. The idea about two alternate realities when serving masters work, I'd like a little bit more of your insight. I'm sure you've seen the resolution of that, especially because Asha talks about it a lot in her talks. I've heard I've heard it mentioned many times. And then Swamiji bringing that up whenever there's disagreement and ideas and both people are serving masters work. And I feel like this is an important topic because we're about to expand here into the physical realm from the ether and on to Dallas and on to Texas. Both people have their own reality, as Swamiji said. And maybe that was a lesson for somebody who's seeking sides, taking a side and seeing and not giving in. I would like to know, how does it play out? How have you seen it play out in serving masters work? where the goal is the same. You want to accomplish something, but there are two different ideas on how to proceed. And both of the people involved or more have their own reality and is equally valued by the master. How does that play out? I know Asha said, somebody said, try and help the other person as much as possible in their reality in order to serve master. How does that play out?
Boy, that's
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's the $1 million question, isn't it? With all of its political things that we see going on these days.
But this is more in reference to master's work, and what we're doing here in Dallas is serving master's work. And we don't know if to go, should we get farmland? Should we get an ashram? Should we get church going first? We have, and right now there's nobody disagreeing. We're, as you saw, we're going to set up a chair and get input. But I'm fascinated by that idea, and that two different realities trying to play out in serving master's work. And does it come down to one being the bigger person, the bigger yogi, so to say, and say, okay, let me see now how I can help you in your reality and in serving master's work, and I'll step down and I'll push my reality down a bit.
I think I would just rephrase it a little bit or reframe it. For me personally, I have a lot of strong opinions. I'm a very opinionated person, right? I have a big personality. And what I saw, and Swamiji did too. Ooh, very big personality. He's a Rishi King. But being able to just literally breathe, take the deep breath, and just come into a place of accepting whatever's right in front of you, and not trying to push, your agenda onto somebody and not push theirs away. Just simply breathe into it, accept it. I know Swamiji talked about many times that he would have this incredibly brilliant visionary idea for the direction Ananda should be going in. From the way early days, and then we saw it in India and everywhere. But sometimes the people who were involved in it weren't ready to go there. There was just enough people that were saying no to it that Swami would just let it go. Let it go. The timing wasn't right yet, was what he would say. And maybe it will be later. He often, this is a little off the subject, but he often felt like that every book he wrote was the one. This is the one that's going to change everything. And I was recently talking to Drupada McDonald, great Vedic astrologer, and he read Swami's chart many, many, many times. And so he knew how Swami moved. And one thing he said was like, yes, Swamiji believed in that moment that was the book, but it wasn't time for us yet. It wasn't time for the world yet. That the evolution has its own rhythm, its own flow, its own timing. And so just being able, I think as a person, just to simply let go and let God be in charge. And then I have said in other places, so often I felt like Swamiji was constantly listening for Master's guidance, his words, almost as if Swamiji would turn and ask. And I had this experience actually seeing this a little bit, I think, when he was leaving. That's why I think he came back in the body and died a second time, because he came back to make sure, Master, really, can I go? Is that what you want? And I said, yeah, come on. So we did. But in anything that we're doing, building a center, an ashram, a temple, a work, is being able to constantly deepen your own attunement with the guru. And as you do that, then your magnetism becomes so much that then when you are dealing with people who perhaps don't necessarily agree with you, they still might want to be a part of what you're doing. Do you know what I mean? Swamiji had such magnetism because of his attunement that even if people didn't agree with him, they wanted to be a part of what he was doing. I don't know if that answers your question, Hugh, but it's a deep question, and I think it's a good question for Asha or Jyotishan. It's beyond me. Anyway, thank you.
That was a wonderful answer, Miriam.
No, thank you, dear. Well, probably we should close. We can do it again someday.
Yeah. Just one little thing. If you would just say, share a little bit about what it was like after Swami passed and you coming back, and how you sort of assimilated back, and if there's a little bit you want to say about that, and I'd love to hear that.
Yeah, it was a very unusual experience. Narayan from Crystal Clarity asked me a similar question in his interview, but talking specifically about grief, because so many of the world is in grief. There's so much happening with the pandemic and stuff. So he was asking that question. And when Swamiji left the body the second time in his bedroom, I felt incredible joy. I mean, his joy was just unbelievable. It was like a balloon just pushed us all up against the wall. It was just enormous joy. But there was also grief, and there was a lot of grief. My grief for losing him was deep. He was my sole reality for 8 years. I was with him for 14, but for 8 years, he was all I thought about, spoke about, and lived with. And something that was gone. It was gone. We were so blessed in Italy that we were able to keep his body for 8 days in the Temple of Light. And in those 8 days, I did spend a lot of time just being with the grief and being okay with it, because it was two-edged. There was great celebration, it was joy in the heavens, but there was grief on the earth. But I would wake up at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, and I just need to see him. I just needed to be in his presence, and I would take off to the temple and go and meditate, sit with him for a while, and it would just be okay. It would just be like, yeah, I took care of that body that's laying there all these years. It was my responsibility, me and Master, and now you're done with it, but you are still here and live on. We were very blessed in Assisi in that the directors there, Nankirtani, Shivani, and Arjuna, let us stay there for 2 months. Our tickets out of the country weren't until June, so we got to stay through all of May and June, and it was good. It was a good time. We didn't have to do anything. We could just be, and we could just be in that grief. It was much harder on Narayani. Her relationship with Swami was much closer. So for her, the grief was quite profound. She and I didn't talk actually for a long time. She couldn't talk about it. And then in moving to Laurelwood, and I guess it would have been the first time I saw you, Maitri, in 14, Daiva, I talked to Daiva Gangamata and knew I was going to Laurelwood. And when I got there, Daiva just said, take 6 months. You don't have to do anything. Just see what's trying to happen here. Just be here, just be. And he also had encouraged me to write if I wanted to write at that time. So I love Ananda, I love community, because there was just like so much being held and supported during that time, because it definitely a transition. And then I could really move into what I was to do there. So, yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, if there is one more question, we will take it. we will hard stop for sure at 1 o'clock our time. But is there one more question? Anybody? There's Pam. Do you have a question, Pam, or are you just waving? She's in Monterey Bay.
Hi. Hi, Miriam.
Hi.
Hi. It's so good to see you. Thank you so much. Yeah, we're having our service today at one of our members' backyards. And Sam is actually up there now. I couldn't go today because my friend, my best, oldest, dearest friend passed this morning.
Oh,
So I thank you for your discussion about grief and the two-edge feel of it, the joy knowing that they're home. She had her whole life was about being in a body that gave her a lot of trouble. She had an open heart surgery when she was 9. I mean, anyway, long story. But so she struggled with that all her life, and now she's out of it, and I can feel her slowly opening to the joy of seeing past loved ones and being in light and feeling relief and release. I can feel that. It's I'm with her. I'm just enjoying the joy of it. But then I'll just burst into tears
Yeah.
for my own.
Yeah.
It's like there's a residual human lower energy that just says, oh, I can't let go. Oh my God. And at the same time, my soul is going, woohoo. It's kind of hard to be in two places at the same time. So I'm sure in a very, very small way, compared to what you all were going through when Swamiji left. But I really appreciate your talk this morning. It was so on point with what I needed to hear. Yeah. And I thank all of my friends in Dallas. Hi, Missy. Hi, Supriya, everybody, for your support. And I love you all. And thank you.
we love you too, Pam. And we will definitely pray for, it was Betty DePaul, I believe is her name. We've been praying and we will pray even now just for her transition, in her soul. So God bless you. I know it's hard. Well,
We better let Miriam go.
okay.
Sounds like she has to practice something.
Yeah. We'll go ahead, I guess, and let's just close. Let's send ohms. Let's send ohms to Miriam. Let's send ohms to Betty's soul. We're just going to share those ohms and blessings to everyone. I hope you all have a healing and wonderful afternoon. And thank you for joining us today. It's been such a pleasure. Thank you so much, Miriam. And somebody said, when come back again soon. So we'll have to figure that out.
Definitely.
And so let's just take a moment, close our eyes, and open ourselves to be channels for that healing energy, for the blessings to both Miriam and also to Betty's soul. And let's rub our hands together and chant Om 3 times, sending out those blessings. Peace, amen.